let's get over to the Democratic reaction. Ryan, you and I are turning over in our grave at this Democratic reaction from Alyssa Slotkin. And let's go ahead and put this one up there on the screen. I'm going to go ahead and make it big here. And let's take a listen. Alyssa Slotkin, if we all remember, the Democratic senator from Michigan, barely won her seat, but significant because Trump did still win the state. So she won some Trump voters. She is a former CIA officer by admission, a literal former
we're
CIA
not outing
spook.
her here.
Yeah. She outed herself. She outed herself for political benefit, and she loves to wear her CIA credentials on her sleeve.
And there's no such thing as former CIA, by the way.
That's right. Thank you. There is no such thing as former CIA, as you and I know. And here's what she had to say during her State of the Union reaction.
He believes in cozying up to dictators like Vladimir Putin and kicking our friends like the Canadians in the teeth. He sees American leadership as merely a series of real estate transactions. As a Cold War kid, I'm thankful it was Reagan and not Trump in office in the 1980s. Trump would have lost us the Cold War. Donald Trump's actions suggest that in his heart, he doesn't believe we're an exceptional nation. He clearly doesn't think we should lead the world. Look, America is not perfect, but I stand with the majority of Americans who believe we are still exceptional, unparalleled. And I would rather have American leadership over Chinese or Russian leadership any day of the week.
Whew. All right. There's so much there.
Yeah, and later she says, I've watched as democracies have flickered out around the globe. It's like, well, that's a rather passive construction. How did some of these democracies flicker out? Like, let's ask the Indonesians or the Brazilians, Argentinians, Chileans, Guatemalans, others. Did your democracy just flicker out, or were there some CIA operatives involved in taking out?
I've got some of that, Ryan.
There goes. There goes your.
Should we take a listen to it?
Yeah, sure.
All right, let's take a listen to it.
I've lived and worked in many countries. I've seen democracies flicker out. I've seen what life is like when a government is rigged. You can't open a business without paying off a corrupt official. You can't criticize the guys in charge without getting a knock at the door in the middle of the night. So as much as we need to make our government more responsive to our lives today, don't for one moment fool yourself that democracy isn't precious and worth saving.
So who was doing the knocking there, Ryan?
Well, Kermit Roosevelt just watched Iran's democracy just flicker out and just shed a gentle tear.
Elise, you were the one knocking on the door. You were the woman who knocks.
When she's saying that she lived, when a CIA officer is like, I lived and worked in countries where the democracy flickered out, it's like, all right, we're going to round up the first suspect. That's you.
Yeah, right. It's incredible. And I hate that you were turning me like into Howard Zinn here. I actually do have some Howard Zinn behind me. So I don't discriminate. I still read Howard. And James Beard. I actually have a signed James Beard behind me, which is crazy. The thing is that people need to understand is that if you zoom out, I'm really curious to hear what you think about this, is the actual debate, I think, between neoconservatism and restraint, except in a similar framework. Today, that's not in the Cold War anymore. But back in Cold War times, there was a very important debate between the Kissingerian worldview, which I know you disagree with, that's fine, but the Kissingerian worldview was, we cannot get rid of the Soviet Union. We have to live with the Soviet Union. We have to accept bipolarity in terms of the system. We have to, we will not be able to pursue a strategy of what was called rollback, which was a Reagan-esque policy where we're going to roll back the borders of the Soviet Union. We are going to pursue a policy of existence and of effectively dividing up the world. Now, there's a ton of criticism of human rights and all of that, but the Kissingerian worldview was that democracy in and of itself under Nixon and all of that was not a end that should be pursued for the United States. Instead, the end that should be pursued is strategic interest, is economics, is balance, is peace, etc. And some of that was keeping communism out of, let's say, the Western Hemisphere, but not necessarily, because that comports with the Monroe Doctrine, but not necessarily in Hungary, for example. The Reagan-esque view, the one that I think Alyssa Slotkin is saying there, is that no, we are endorsing rollback. Effectively, the communism itself is the evil empire. We cannot live in a world with the Soviet Empire. And in our inability to live with that, the pursuit and the policy of the United States should always be to push back against these borders and to call it out complete. Now, the reason why I think that's important in this Putin-Ukraine situation is the Biden previous view. Yeah, we got the cat doing some gymnastics behind me. The previous Biden policy, Putin is a war criminal. We cannot deal with Putin. The Putin regime itself is illegitimate from Biden, which means that there is no settlement with Ukraine, that Ukraine itself is the front line of democracy, very similarly in the way that Voice of America was continuing to push democracy, right, in Hungary or any of these so-called Soviet-occupied states. Well, the point here, I think, is it comes down to then the Trump view of, no, we're just going to sit down and we're going to talk and pursue a peace deal. Now, this, view is now majorly in contention, but it's flipped where now you have the Democrats who are seen to to basically embody this previously neoconservative liberal world order view of the world, America, the exceptional nation, and all of that. Whereas now Trump, at least, not the whole Republican Party, is pursuing, at least in this Ukraine instance, more of a realist foreign policy. So I actually think that while it was a small snippet, it does say a lot about your previous view of the Cold War, of the United States conduct, but more importantly, how to think about conflict in the future as we approach more multipolarity in the system.
I think that Democrats and Democratic elites in particular, as plus the Lindsey Grahams, the more hawkish Republicans of the world, were very energized by being on the right side of history after Russia invaded Ukraine, because it's clear that's what they did. They lined up troops on the border, they marched them in. You can talk about what happened before February 2022 till you're blue in the face, but the world and the American audience saw troops lining up on a border 2022 and doing something they didn't think was happening anymore in this world, and marching in and heading right for Kyiv. And so this was after 50 years of being the bad guys, whether it was Vietnam, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And it came not long after the kind of ignoble and kind of chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, which good for Biden for doing it. Let me underscore that again. But it was embarrassing to the Lindsey Grahams and the Democratic hawks of the world. So they were really loving finally having the ability to speak with moral force. And Democrats the Democratic base was along for that ride, because they saw that, no, this is outrageous. How can you do this? There was never any debate within the Democratic Party over how this war would end. And so even as the reality was, fundamentally changing on the ground, and Ukraine's, second counteroffensive is fizzling out, and they're running out of men to throw at the front lines anymore because of this lack of debate, the Democratic base is still in February 2022. Like, we need to defend Ukrainian sovereignty and democracy against the evil Putin. And so the whiplash is just full force to then see the Republican Party, which has been having these debates about what land should be exchanged for peace and what are the conditions that should be agreed to see that happen. Like, their only reaction is that he must be a traitor, and he must be an autocrat like Putin, must be loving Putin. And the whole time, it's like, Russia's not even that big a deal. Like, China there are two global powers right now, the United States and China. And Democrats really seem very fixated on elevating Russia into that instead. Like, they have some block.
Well, I think this is where Russiagate comes in.
Yeah,
I think this is where Russiagate comes in, is that, you went from a situation where Obama had the correct view of Ukraine.
Right.
Everyone can go and read the Jeffrey Goldberg interview with Obama from 2015, where he was like, if you want to make an argument that Crimea is a vital national security interest that's worth U.S. troops, he's like, go for it. I don't agree with that. And I think that the Russians will always care way more about it than we do. He was right? He was right not to escalate the conflict in Ukraine. If anything, the worst thing that Trump did on Ukraine was not the perfect phone call. It was to ship javelins to the country to escalate the conflict and to increase even more of basically this like hawkish approach vis-a-vis Russia, which basically like builds things up to a powder keg and explodes in the Ukraine invasion. Now, of course, it's Ukraine.
Didn't he ship the javelins in order to get Zelensky to like throw Hunter Biden under the bus? Wasn't that whole thing?
Yeah. So no, he was not shipping javelins,
right?
Because he wanted to hold up javelin aid. So this is the thing: is it's baked into the lore of the United States. Actually, I remember Krystal and I talking about it at the time because we covered that impeachment live, and it was like, oh, did you know it's written in the constitutions that you have to send javelin missiles to Ukraine? Like it's like this is impeachable offense. What? It's like, no, let's return to the Obama policy. I don't care about saying that. It was the correct policy. So I do think there's a lot to be said about it. And look, I mean, part of the problem is that negative polarization means that after that Trump-Zelensky interview, liberals who are already on board with the war in Ukraine, they're never coming back from full Ukrainian victory now. Zelensky is a hero for them because he stood up to Trump or whatever. It doesn't even matter. You can go watch our debate with me and Krystal yesterday about who was to fault, but negative polarization means like liberals are all in on this war. It is now a religion in the same way that Russiagate was a religion, is that any peace of any kind itself is unacceptable now, especially you've got Michael McCall and you've got Chris Murphy and the MSNBC crowd just absolutely losing it. The choice of Slotkin, I think it's very, very important for people to see that, yes, while all of the rhetoric and all of that is posturing, there are very real world implications for policy that are right behind this. And I'm not saying, Trump Gaza and all of that isn't a very obvious departure from this. I'm only speaking very narrowly in the Ukraine context. But hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.